practices and preparations. We have a stellar panel with the Minister of Defense from Netherlands, Keizer Ollongren. We have the Chief of Defense Staff, General Anil Chauhan. We have Andrew Shearer, Director General, Office of National Intelligence, Australia. We have Ambassador Susan Chenoy, Director General of the Mohan Parekar Institute for Defense Studies. And we have Yana Ben Yehuda, Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council of the United States. Lisa Singh will be moderating this discussion. But before we proceed with the discussion, let me invite a longtime friend and partner, Vivek Lal, Chief Executive of the General Atomics Global Corporation, United States of America, to do a scene setter. So Vivek, may I request you to come on stage, please? Please join me in welcoming Vivek.
Thanks so much, Samir. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to keep you between this outstanding panel, but give you some of my thoughts on this topic to kind of set the scene for what will be a very excellent panel for you. Dissolving lines, of course, between state and non-state actors have altered the character of conflicts, where the lines delineating licit and illicit have largely disappeared, deepening the local population's vulnerability to abuse. As a result, asymmetric warfare has become a serious challenge to the state and the military in the contemporary world. Militaries fail to predict conflicts because studies based on previous experiences are inadequate to develop definitions of future manifestations of conflict and warfare. The future conflicts are unlikely to be a linear extrapolation of past conflicts, and a straightforward extension not only limits our thinking and preparation, but also leaves us vulnerable to future warfighting techniques. Hence, advanced technologies driving changes in conflating new military domains are becoming increasingly relevant to conventional military strategies, an emerging manifestation of contemporary warfare. The defense economy has evolved, and globalization of the defense industry remains the dominant economic factor driving greater synergies. Increasing tolerance of the export control regime not only permits exports, but also co-development and co-production with partner nations, willing to engage and mutually benefit in areas of critical and emerging technologies. Countries with a vibrant ecosystem, along with human talent, will emerge as frontrunners by adapting to revolutionary breakthroughs in new technologies. And there are several. As an example, a single crewed controlling multiple autonomous platforms containing high-performance computing with ubiquitous sensor extension and sustained air combat power, independent of runways and forward logistics footprints, will provide air dominance in contested environment. Air superiority in low-intensity conflict will provide an edge to uncrewed platforms, autonomously operating from permissive to denied environment controlled, either by state or non-state actors. Adaptive airborne enterprise interface will shrink traditional RPA's crew-deployed footprint and provide operators with the flexibility and mobility to fly multiple platforms from non-traditional locations. Military applications of the 3 A's, if you will, AI, automation, and autonomous systems, include air domain persistence via semi-autonomous, long-endurance airborne systems coupled with narrow AI optimization algorithms. To run them will not only increase the reach of the weapon platforms and undermine capability of potential adversary, but also alter the nature and scope of warfare. I will leave you with a couple of thoughts in terms of two categories which I think are important to note. One is the non-state actors. In other words, criminals who operate on a military scale. I think for that, some of the issues to be addressed is persistent surveillance, robust data sharing between countries, constant training cooperation between countries, in particular special forces skills, And finally, military-police force collaboration, without breaking constitutional bounds. The other category I will leave a thought with you is on asymmetric warfare against rogue states. Here again, persistent ISR is a strong deterrent. Electromagnetic spectrum dominance will be critical. Ability to correlate petabytes of available sensor data into a real-time operational picture, again, will be critical. Ability to deliver massive numbers, especially loitering munitions, I think will also be critical in asymmetric warfare. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity and look forward to a great panel.
Thank you, Vivek, for setting the scene for the conversation that is to follow. Let me now invite the panelists on stage, Minister of Defense, Netherlands, Minister Ollongren, General Anil Chauhan, Andrew Shearer, Sujan Chinoy, Jenna Ben Yehuda, and Lisa Singh. Lisa Singh, you have 50 minutes, and they are all yours. The only instruction is keep the mic close to your face as you speak, because there is a very large online audience watching this, and it will help with the audio quality. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, thank you to Samir, and thank you to the ORF and to the Ministry of External Affairs for hosting such a impactful, dynamic, and meaningful Raisina Dialogue for 2024. It's an honour to be moderating this panel. Of course, on the Raisina session titled The New Wars, Policies, Practices and Preparation. I think it's incredibly timely with the current global climate, so I'm very excited that we have the opportunity today to better our understanding of the transition from traditional to modern warfare and the implications of these challenges in conflict dynamics. And to do that, I am joined by leaders in the defence and security sector from India, from the Netherlands, from Australia and the United States, who I will be asking to really dive into the themes of this new emerging era of warfare. I'm then going to allow about 10 minutes or so at the end for questions from the floor, and that will give an opportunity for you to think about that during the next 50 minutes. Over the past number of years, the international security environment has become much more complicated. And in that evolving landscape of warfare, this means very much that traditional mechanisms are yielding to unconventional methods and tactics, as we just heard from Vivek. The world has borne witness to a disruptive diversification between traditional warfare strategies and a new era of digitised weaponry, operating in the shadows and around the clock. Cyber threats, supply chain disruptions, and the proliferation of lethal semi-autonomous weapons by both state and non-state actors are just some of the many emerging themes of modern warfare. Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine and the recent threat of the Houthi group in the Red Sea pose important questions on the use of informal warfare and the threats to national security. But these shared challenges allow us to really open and continue conversations on how nations of shared interests can come together to address these issues. So to do just that, I would like to introduce our panel, India's Chief of Defence Staff, General Anil Chauhan, Netherlands Minister for Defence, Kaja Ollongren, Andrew Shearer, Director General of National Intelligence in Australia, Sujan Chinoy, the Director General of India's Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis and former Ambassador, and the Executive Vice President of the Atlantic Council of the United States, Jenna Ben Yehuda. Welcome to our panel. So let's just dive straight in. The world is world of warfare is incredibly complex. And what we see now is very much the blurring of the lines between state and non-state actors and the growing role of emerging technologies in modern combat, highlighting the emergence of a new era of warfare. So to begin, I would really like to ask each and every one of you, and I'll start with you, Jenna, and go along, just to ask you to briefly describe your understanding of what informal warfare is, how you see it manifested in current conflicts, and what challenges, if any, does it pose to conventional defence strategies. Jenna.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa, and it's a pleasure to be with everybody. I'm looking forward to hearing my co-panelists' responses to this. I think we at the Atlantic Council have a perspective on this through our program, Adding Color to the Gray Zone. We really talk about kind of two elements here, and I'm glad we're setting the stage with definitions. So when we talk about the gray zone, we're really referring to the defensive and offensive activity that is above cooperation and below the threshold of armed conflict. That's a pretty broad space. And so then when we think about a hybrid conflict or the hybrid nature of warfare, we're thinking about kind of three key elements in their interplay. The first would be a domain combination. And we talk in the US about DIME, so diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, the last of which we've certainly seen a dramatic increase in its usage. Two, where it exists along the spectrum of the competition continuum. It could range from cooperation to competition, deterrence, and all the way up to armed conflict. And the third would be the purpose of it impacting the national security objectives against a state or non-state actor. This comes into play in a number of places. You mentioned the Houthis. This is a really dramatic example of a leveling of the playing field, if you will, a relatively unsophisticated armed group having a tremendous impact on world commerce. In its first month, dramatic declines by a third. That combined with the drought we saw in the Panama Canal and Gatun Lake, creating really massive disruption in shipping. This was intended to be a response to pressure Israel in its war in Gaza in response to the Hamas attacks, but one of the countries most impacted in that has been Egypt, who derives a quarter of its currency earnings from those very passage tallies. So what we see here is a shrapnel effect almost of sometimes these intended effects might be wide-ranging, which can make them hard to plan for and proportionality hard to respond to.
Thanks, Jenna. Ambassador.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me here. For me, the main features of informal warfare or new wars today are that we are contending with a multiplicity of definitions here: hybrid warfare, asymmetrical warfare, unconventional warfare, low-intensity warfare, and above all, prolonged conflicts, the type that do not seem to have any kind of end to them, and nobody really wants ceasefires. So we're looking at this kind of a scenario in which increasingly things like trade, technology, and even tenets, as in narratives, that is to say, systems of governance, whether social, political, cultural, or economic, are increasingly being weaponized. So we are looking at this complex scenario in which I also see a fusion of state and non-state actors. In the case of state actors, I see an increasing tendency to use conventional and non-conventional means. So it's a very, very complex situation, and all recent wars have, to some extent, exhibited these qualities, including the extensive use of cheap, asymmetrical means to bridge absolute gaps in military power, as we saw in the case of Hamas's rockets, for example, or the drones that have been used so far. So we can expect this situation to continue with also an increasing blend of other aspects that are around us, that is the use of cyber power and increasing use of artificial intelligence. And I feel that in artificial intelligence, you are now looking at a super spreader of misinformation, which will also impinge on military decisions. Facial recognition will mean that commanders on the battlefield will be identified individually, perhaps taken out individually in order to impact on the morale of troops. And I think that is something that we must keep in mind. But there are some silver linings to this, like natural language processing capabilities of AI. For me, I see a possibility to create soldier support systems, translation systems, which can also help confidence building measures, for example, in face-to-face situations or situations involving prolonged face-offs. But I can elaborate on this as we go down the line. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Andrew.
Thank you, Lisa, and it's an honour to be on such a distinguished panel. I'm just going to make a few observations. So we're really inspired by a great speech that General Chauhan gave at dinner yesterday, and that is to say, I want to talk first about the nature of informal warfare, and Jenna did a great job, I think, with setting the definitional picture here, and then make some comments a bit about the character of informal warfare. My observation about the nature of informal warfare or grey zone conflict is that this phenomenon is really as old as warfare itself. There's nothing really new about the fundamental nature of this. Just one example from an Australian perspective is our involvement in the Confrontasi episode in the mid-1960s, but that was really very typical of the below the threshold struggle that went on right through the Cold War period, and that's just a relatively recent historical example. Fundamentally, this is about the pursuit of political objectives and in some cases geo-economic objectives. That includes pursuit, obviously, of territorial claims, but it can also include efforts to increase your military advantage or to weaken opponents. All of these are classic tenets, of course, of military strategy. I think it's worth making the observation that informal warfare or grey zone tactics are often a feature of periods of heightened tension, and that's the case right through history. And of course, we are now, unfortunately, living through another period of elevated global tension. And because I'm an intelligence officer, it's my job to draw attention to the downside risks. It often precedes open hostilities. That's just a historical reality that I think we have to be mindful of, and perhaps we'll get a chance just to talk about the role of intelligence in that context, because of course warning becomes a critical responsibility for my community in those circumstances that conflict could break through the threshold. Even though the nature of informal warfare is not changing, I would suggest, as the ambassador was just saying, that the character of informal warfare is changing and changing very rapidly, and that means we have to stay up with the pace. The range of actors involved is multiplying significantly, and I think it's worth paying attention to the fact that obviously it involves sort of covert forces of different types, proxies of different types, militias, but also increasingly private companies. This is not new. There was a thing called the East India Company. It's worth flagging here, but we are seeing with Wagner and similar companies, I think, a greater role for a range of non-state actors in the field of informal conflict, and even individuals. And on that note, that really brings me just briefly to technology and the role of technology in, if you like, democratising or distributing capabilities that were not previously available to small non-state groups or other non-state actors, including companies, or indeed to individuals. And technology is driving a massive increase in the speed and scale the reach, the impact, and in some cases the lethality of capabilities that are relevant to informal warfare. Disinformation, we're all obviously very focused on the potential for artificial intelligence to massively increase the quantity of disinformation, but perhaps even more importantly, the quality of disinformation. So we're watching that very closely. Cyber and its impact through social media, interference, and we've talked about the other capabilities. I think these emerging tools of informal warfare become even more important and can have a strategic impact when they're well integrated with the other more traditional instruments of national statecraft and power, whether that's traditional diplomacy or military power or economic coercion or foreign interference, which are both issues that have been a preoccupation for Australia, and I know from talking to counterparts for many others, and also lawfare, which is a feature of both the Russian and Chinese playbooks in this area. And then finally, the ability of these tools of informal warfare to target what I like to think of as traditional Western binaries. You know, the Western mind is habituated to the idea that we are either at peace or we're at war. And we believe very deeply as part of our DNA that you're either a combatant or a non-combatant. Well, our adversaries in the grey zone do not have that view. They believe in perpetual struggle, which is sometimes non-kinetic, but often kinetic as well, and they deliberately exploit those gaps. So just a few final thoughts. We need to be focused on our preparedness. That's everything from expanding our military industrial production. This was a huge issue in Munich when I was at the Munich Security Conference last week. We're all aware of it. There's a massive amount of capability across the West and beyond, but somehow we're in a situation where the sum is less than the parts, and we need to remedy that as a matter of urgency. And then we need the technological capabilities, and we need the partnerships to take on these challenges. And there's been a lot of talk about supply chains here, about protecting our supply chains. I'm looking hard, as the ambassador was saying, at North Korea's supply chains into Russia and elsewhere, and also Iran's. And I think we have to get over those much more aggressively, because those that league of authoritarian powers and the military and dual-use supply chains are starting to have strategic effect.
Thank you. Andrew, General.
Thank you, Lisa. What I'll do is I'll first talk about the impact of informal wars on conventional defense, and then maybe I'll talk about how do we prepare for it. When I was a middle-level officer in one of a school of tactics, reading about defense, it was a normal saying that if enemy has only 4 options available to him, he's actually going to choose the 5th option. In informal wars, the enemy has more options than the 5th option. He has the 6th, 7th, 8th, multiple options he has. When we talk about conventional defense, defense per se has some kind of a finite thing attached to it. It's finite in time, space, etc. Offense is not so finite. So defense is always finite, whereas when you enter the territory of informal warfare, the options available to the adversary are much more. The targets are legitimate, which actually in formal wars were only very few. The area is very vast. He could go on to any kind of a domain. So he has a particular kind of an advantage over there. The second important thing which we learned over there that, defense by itself will not do. Defense has to be slightly proactive. We also talked about mobile kind of a defense, so you have to be always shifting. When we talk about defense proper, I think over here, there are 2 ways to defend it, and this how it will happen, means how it affects actually conventional operations. One is deterrence. So you have to have a strong deterrence actually, so that that deterrence is able to dissuade those actors who are like to carry out this kind of informal actions. So that I think is important. And slightly, I think probably we'll have to be slightly proactive while dealing with informal warfare. So that would require a good kind of an intelligence setup and a faster kind of a reaction. As far as non-traditional threats are concerned, or say how do we adjust towards these formal arrangements of informal threats, these threats actually cut across multiple domains, and they affect not only the military, they affect the intelligence agencies, they affect the people who are involved with the national security architecture. So you require to have within the government multi-agency coordination between all actually to perceive these kind of threats. Then of course these kind of informal wars, they also cut across national boundaries. So then again there is a requirement to coordinate between your friends and partners to understand what kind of threats are likely to emerge. And then finally they also cut across multiple disciplines. So it is not only related to say what happens in the field of military, but it could be say bio threats or say pandemics, such kind of non-traditional threats. And we all know what happened during the COVID pandemic. At least as a country, with such a huge population base, we are just caught unprepared for this. And then we had to get various organs of the government work together, work with foreign agencies, get things going over here. The vaccines were made somewhere else, and then of course manufacturing was done, mass manufacturing was done over here, and a whole lot of things. So this fighting this kind of a war actually requires you to be very, very innovative. You'll have to be very, very adaptive and very, very inventive in your approach if you go to succeed in this kind of warfare. And that's what I would say, Lisa.
Thank you, General. Minister.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, let me thank my co-panelists for setting the scene as well as they've done, because I would say, what is hybrid warfare? What is informal warfare? It's all of the above, everything that's been said, and that makes it so complex. And I think it is, it's true, it's not new. It's the blur between peace and war, between truth and lies, and it's always been part of warfare. But it is gaining traction in the world that we live in now. It's becoming more important, and it's very complicated because it's used by non-state actors and by state actors. And it targets states, but it also targets civilians within our states. So it's not military to military. And that makes it complicated. I think we all know that we have to deal with it every day. We're suffering cyber attacks as countries, as companies. We are noticing in our part of the world that our seabed infrastructure is being mapped. And I don't think it's out of interest for the seabed, it's out of interest for our critical infrastructure. We know that espionage is happening on a daily basis. We are aware of, for instance, migrants being used in hybrid warfare at our borders in Europe. So this is happening to us, and it's very complicated for governments to deal with it, especially as it is done in ways that we don't have the instruments. So if you look at, for instance, economic coercion, where economic powerhouses gain access to critical assets such as energy infrastructures, for instance, then you have to start in a very, very early stage. Because once it's done, it's often too late to deal with it again. And having access to that critical infrastructure, ports, for instance, energy infrastructure, means that you have not the full control of your own infrastructure. And full control of your infrastructure is vital, of course, once you are fighting in a war. So these are really new challenges that we have to add to our conventional defense strategies and that we have to face. And as a Minister of Defense, I know that we, as the Ministry of Defense, as our armed forces, cannot deal with this alone. So this requires a whole of society approach. We need society in there. We need our companies to engage, to our port authorities, our energy infrastructure companies, our cyber experts to cooperate with us. and also to recognize the threats. And we in the Netherlands and in Europe, we often experience that people don't feel the threat that is actually there. And that is why we are now exposing more of it. Our secret services usually don't want to talk about what they do, but now we have to, because we have to make people aware of the fact that they are also subject to this type of influencing. That brings me to the last subject that I would like to raise, and that is the use of misinformation. We know that Russia has been meddling in elections in various countries. It's all out in the open. We also know that there are state actors who are involved in trying to divide groups within countries, to polarize societies, using misinformation, using social media. And I very strongly believe that transparency is the best answer to it. But also making people aware in our societies of the fact that social media can mislead, that AI can be a very powerful weapon for our enemies to use in trying to influence the opinions of public and even influence thereby the outcome of elections, something that I think is important to notice in the largest democracy in the world. So it has various forms, and we need various answers and instruments to tackle hybrid warfare.
Thank you, Minister. I think all our panellists have given such a deep dive, as I asked for, into your understanding and the context of informal warfare. It has meant that we only have about 20 minutes left for me to ask each and every one of you a question specifically. I wanted to start, though, actually I might start with you, Minister, in following on from your contribution to talk about the use of drones. You know, it's very much at the moment something where the use of drones are foreshadowing a world in which armed conflicts are conducted by pretty much remote control. And in the context of Ukraine and Russia, the hypermodern battleground where drones play a crucial role in surveillance and reconnaissance and combat missions, it really does demonstrate that huge shift away from manned weaponry. So, Minister, I wanted to ask you what role you do see the use, how you see the use of drones playing out, also uncrewed aerial vehicles in current conflicts like Russia and Ukraine, but also future conflicts.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, what we're seeing now in Ukraine, I think it shows that there is conventional warfare combined with new technologies, and that is very dominant in this war. And I think the Ukraine's successes are thanks to their ability to really incorporate those new technology while they are fighting this war. And it's quite impressive. I think it also shows that it's unthinkable not to use drones in warfare. And when I say drones, I mean new technology used in drones, all kinds of unmanned systems on every layer in your air defense, and also, as we've seen in the Black Sea, in and on the sea. And also the response to it, of course, which means that electronic warfare has become much more important. And if you have the ability to adapt your technology all the time and actually use it in warfare, then you're going to be the stronger in the fight. So drones, apps, space, satellites. It is indispensable in modern warfare, and that means that for us, monitoring and detection is going to be very important, so we have to invest strongly in that, and that means that we are also going to invest strongly in our cooperation and coordination with partner countries, exchange of experience in all kinds of international fora, and having that edge. In India, for instance, you have, of course, very highly educated expertise and people that you can use to advance that technology. And for us, it's vital that we cooperate with other countries, because I think there we have it's what we need in the future. And I think it's not drones. It's more than drones. It's AI. It is using AI where we see already, of course, the usage of drones in swarms. And how the question we have to ask ourselves is, how can we use it? How can we use AI, drones, and new technologies in a way that also protects our military, that protect our armed forces, that make us stronger and also safer? And at the same time, I feel very strongly that we should use AI and new technologies also to make war as fair as possible. And that may sound strange, but I think one of the purposes that we have, that our armed forces have, is also to avoid civil casualties. We're seeing much too many of them now in Gaza. We're seeing much too many of them in Ukraine. And using new techniques will also make it possible to be much more targeted in your warfare. So technologies can have great advantages if used in the right ways, and we also have to be aware of the fact that our adversaries are so often not very bothered by these issues. So to engage and have that type of conversation is also impossible. But it's changing warfare completely.
Well, of course, drones have also come into play when we look at the return, you know, in a sense, in the return of proxy wars. And Ambassador, I wanted to ask you, we've seen with Iran supplying drones to the Houthi as an example of that. Russia similarly has been known to use proxies to further their aims and expand influence. So Ambassador, what are the consequences with these sorts of tactics, using these sorts of tactics? What are the consequences on global security more broadly? And are we seeing a return of the proxy wars?
So let me begin by saying that drones, in fact, have become a very potent object in the hands of belligerents. And we have seen the use of drones in all the recent conflicts, beginning with the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict, but more recently, the use of the Samad-1 drone produced by Iran. We have seen that in the hands of the Russians as well. And these have been known to take out, for example, tanks, as we have seen when Ukraine used drones against Russian tanks. In the case of Hamas, they used drones, cheap drones, to drop ordnance on what you call ISR capabilities and watchtowers along the Israel-Gaza border. And this therefore takes you into a totally new realm when combined with armed UAVs. For example, the Houthis possess the Asif and Tufan missiles which have a long range. They have drones which have a long range. And so where does that leave things like arms control treaties? The MTCR, for example, in my view, is completely dead as a dodo right now, because these technologies have become fungible, they are being proliferated, and it also leads to the question as to what is happening with the NPT in general, or the other treaties like the New START Treaty. The INF and the ABM are gone. So what does that mean for the future of warfare? And I think it's particularly relevant to keep in mind that non-state actors, when they possess territory, they become even more potent. We have seen the case of the Hezbollah in Lebanon. When they acquire territory and have influence over the local people, they are much harder to get rid of or to deal with. The Houthis have done the same thing in Yemen. We have seen Hamas do that in Gaza. And there are other examples of the ISIS in both Iraq and Syria, and more relevantly, the recent example of the Taliban in Afghanistan. So remember that a non-state actor in possession of territory is much harder to get rid of. And such a belligerent will always use cheaper means like drones, homemade garage-made rockets to overwhelm the adversary. But may I also say very briefly here that this is an era of informal warfare in which private players, the private internet, private individuals like Elon Musk, for example, with his Starlink, are beginning to have a say in the conduct of warfare and also in outcomes. So we are looking at that. On the other hand, there is the advent of NGOs, civil society, the youth, and transnational constituencies that do not agree with their own governments in regard to their views regarding a certain adversary. And they are beginning to have a say in the conduct of informal warfare and outcomes as well. So I think these are important to keep in mind.
Look, I want to move and look at the issue of critical infrastructure. We're increasingly seeing a trend in acts of sabotage, including gas pipelines and undersea cables for telecommunications, all of which cross national borders, all of which often run through international borders. If we focus on Huawei, for example, a company that is state-owned and known to share intelligence with the Chinese government. Andrew, I wanted to ask you, what is the role of intelligence in responding to these sorts of non-traditional threats?
Well, thanks, Lisa. I guess my starting point is that in a period like this where there's much more of this sort of grey zone activity, intelligence, I think, takes on more responsibility and in some ways has become more prominent, which is not always something we welcome, I have to say. When I think about what this means for us, I start with a very traditional role for intelligence, which is strategic warning. And that's very real for us in Australia, where for several decades we worked in our defence policy on the assumption we had a 10-year strategic warning window of a major conflict. And after a major review last year, the Australian government has accepted the premise that that's no longer true. That's profoundly significant for our defence policy, and I feel the additional responsibility of providing warning that this grey zone activity could break through into open conflict. It's a very profound responsibility for me and my colleagues, and that applies in the cyber domain and other aspects as well. The second is also a classic responsibility of intelligence, and that is to provide situational awareness for our decision makers and decision-making advantage. And that's in the traditional sense of giving as much context about conflict as possible or impending conflict, but also in, for example, critical infrastructure. It's a wider responsibility now to help government make very difficult cost-benefit decisions about foreign investment in our major critical infrastructure and about critical technologies. That is also an area where our responsibilities have increased. And of course, providing support for our warfighters will remain central. And then just the third thing I'd flag is the role of intelligence as itself a tool of statecraft. And in this grey zone domain, we bring, for example, intelligence diplomacy as a tool for government, working in close alignment with policy, building out our intelligence partnership, sharing our assessments. That's really important because when governments share a common picture about the threat, they're more likely to take coordinated and aligned action in response. And building up the capability of our partner services, in Australia's case, especially in Southeast Asia and the Pacific, means increased aggregate capacity, and it also means that we are lifting the levels of security with all our partners and reducing the overall threat surface. And then finally, I'll leave it on this enigmatic note. For Western and other intelligence services, there's always been a strong historical association between intelligence and covert action, and intelligence services continue to provide a range of tools to government, and I think it's really important that we have the capabilities to confront our adversaries wherever they choose to challenge us, including in the grey zone.
So on the grey zone, my last question is on that specifically to both Jenna and to the General. I wanted to, firstly just to the General, you've played a significant role in India's national security transformation. How do you see grey zone warfare, particularly influencing, or how do you see it counteracting these sorts of hybrid threats? And then I'll throw to you, Jen.
So, Lisa, let me begin by saying that in this lexicon on warfare, we have this gray zone as this latest entry, and this is because what's happened in South China Sea and what's happened along our northern borders. In my view, gray zone warfare is some kind of a military action below a particular threshold which will invite a response. And you try to actually differentiate the difference between how West thinks warfare is and how East thinks warfare is. And it spoke about that West thinks about two possibilities of peace and war, and there's something which is no war, no peace in between, and the difference between kinetic and non-kinetic and combatants and non-combatants. Let me add a couple of more things to this particular debate. I think in the Western construct, we believe in direct military action, whereas in the Chinese construct or the Eastern construct, it would be timely military action. That I think would be important. The end state in any Western construct would be a decisive military kind of a victory, whereas probably in an Oriental kind of a construct, it would be decisive military positioning actually, rather than a victory. So that is, I think, is important. Then, whenever we talk about gray zone, probably the dividends of what military action you take today, dividends may be available to you after many, many years actually, may not be at that particular moment. I think that again is important. And to start this, possibly, you will have to have some kind of a historical or a dispute to this particular issue to be successful in launching this kind of warfare. So, so to tackle gray zone warfare, you require multiple kind of approaches because the origin may lie in a historical dispute. So you have to be very correct. So it will range from history, it will range from legal warfare, it will range for preparation for all kinds of conditions which I just spoke about.
Thank you, General. Jenna, what are some of the challenges on the US side for hybrid threats and in this grey zone warfare?
So we have a few more hours to address some of the complexity here. We've talked a lot about the nature of the problem. I think we all agree it's huge and it's really complicated, and it means that we need to talk to more people and different people more often. So how do you do that? Because I think what we're all saying is that our systems of government, our militaries, are not necessarily designed for this kind of dynamic. So what you perceive here is this friction between the world we live in and the world that we've built systems designed to confront. And that misalignment is that sticky place where we are. So what do you do about it? The late, great US Defense Secretary Ash Carter was once asked, what is the greatest threat to US national security? And he said, defense acquisition. And he was only half kidding. And there are many people here who had the privilege of working for him. And you know what I mean, because it takes way too long to field the kinds of systems and weaponry that we need to be able to be responsive to the moment in which we live. Andrew's comment about that warning time frame shifting from 10 years to, in some cases, potentially weeks, if you're lucky, has dramatic consequences. So what do you do about it? I think Ukraine offers a really compelling example because it's not just what kinds of technology you have, although table stakes, it's important. And we see what the impact of a lack of ammunition has meant for Ukraine. But if that is the base layer, the differentiator is really in the ability for governments to deploy that technology and to do it at scale and with agility and with speed. So thinking about interoperability, responsiveness, that's also hugely important. One of the other risks of this type of conflict is also of unintended escalation. When you don't know if something, you know it's not peace, you know it's not war, it's somewhere in the middle, how do you respond to it? Our doctrine doesn't necessarily provide a script for that. The doctrine needs to get better and needs to adapt to this world, but it also means that we need more avenues of cooperation and dialogue. And that is a case for diplomacy. Really being able to connect with counterparts, to pick up the phone, to have harder conversations and trusted conversations. Within our own societies, it means we have to work to increase levels of trust in government, in military, in our own information. Countries that fared the worst in COVID were not necessarily those who had poor health systems. They were those countries with the lowest levels of trust. And so thinking about agility, interoperability, the ability to scale, rethinking acquisition, really getting to it, addressing those low levels of trust and increasing the ability to bring down that escalatory ladder quickly, that is a way to be responsive to this current moment. It's not going to be easy.
Look, our panellists have given us so much food for thought to now open it up to the floor, and I'm pleased that we have a little bit of time to be able to do that. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hands, and I'm actually going to ask you to state your name, but also I will start with the Raisina Young Fellows and then see how we go for time with anyone else. So, yes.
Thank you, Chair. Samuel Bashfield from the Australia-India Institute and also part of this very esteemed Raisina Young Fellows program. So I want to pick up on one theme that's been brought up in this conversation, which is critical infrastructure that transits the seabed. Now, of course, this is not only submarine data cables, but also gas pipelines, electricity cables, and infrastructure associated with offshore renewable energy connections. And these are the so-called seabed lines of communication. So my question is, I'd really value any reflections on how the seabed protection interacts in this new era of new wars. Thank you.
Okay, our panelist, seabed protection. Minister.
Yes, thank you. I'd love to answer that question because it's a very important question and we're dealing with it every day. As I said, we are seeing it happening in our North Sea. We see Russian vessels passing through. They can because it's international water, no problem. And we know it's exactly this that is very vulnerable to sabotage. So how can you respond to this? Well, first of all, awareness and protection. And that is something that we're often looked at as the Ministry of Defense and our Navy, but they cannot possibly do that alone. So we need the private companies, the owners of the cables and the pipelines and everything in there. And we're making great progress with them. We have very great examples in Europe of countries who've been able to map everything and to make sure that they have real-time awareness of what is happening there on the seabed. So that's the first thing you have to do. The second thing is that we expose the activities. So if we know that this mapping is being done or any other suspicious activity is going on, we simply expose it. We make sure that the actor engaged knows that we are aware, and we expose it to our public. And the last line of defense is also to make sure that we will respond. We will respond. So we engage with our partners. It's of course always a specific region that you're looking at. So in our case, the North Sea partners. We have joined in the JEF, Joint Expeditionary Force, all Northern European countries that put their capabilities in, and they will be there in no time if something happens. So to be very firm of this, both on the engagement of the private companies, of the awareness and the exposure, and our response is sending the signal that this for us is not acceptable. I mean, you can do a lot of damage, and you can do a lot of harm, both ways, always. It's not only two sides. But we are really cautious, of course, of what is happening, but firm in our response.
Thank you. And Ambassador.
Could I just say that an informal warfare has already begun with regard to deep seabed mining and undersea resources, thermal vents, polymetallic nodules, etc. And we can see that in the Pacific, in the Northern Pacific, and the Clarion-Clipperton zone, there are a number of players there, including the Chinese with Comra. In the Indian Ocean, we see that the scrimmage is now shifting towards the acreage given by the International Seabed Authority of the Rodrigues Ridge in the Indian Ocean. And the important thing here is that a country like the United States of America is not even a member of the International Seabed Alliance, the International Seabed Authority. And so therefore, it gives an opportunity to certain countries, you know who I'm referring to actually influence the International Seabed Authority, its workshops, its funding, its meetings. And you now have countries like Nauru, which has just switched allegiance from Taiwan to the People's Republic, clamoring for completing the regulatory norms within a short time. And who will then contribute to this rule making is the question. So I think many more countries need to take interest in the making of norms for seabed resources, and notably the United States of America.
Thank you. We might have time for one more question. Yes, sir.
My question is to General Anil Chauhan, sir. So given that China is weaponizing the dependencies, like following a whole of society approach, how do we as a society and citizens prepare ourselves to counter this offensive? And while we are preparing, how do we strike a fine balance to ensure that our security needs are also met? At the same time, we don't create a security dilemma and fragmentation of global value chains.
You know, you have brought in a different dimension of the Chinese threat, actually. And in the military, we've traditionally considered with the traditional kind of a threats with the Chinese. So not only what's happening onto the northern borders, but also long-term challenges so that we don't have a technological kind of a deficit. But you have brought in a concept where you're trying to get the whole of nation approach towards preparing yourself against this kind of a Chinese surging kind of a capacity which they can build to this. This will require a different kind of a thought process. It will require involvement of all organs and all instruments of the government to think this particular threat through and create capacities not only in the field of military, in information domain, in your perception management domain, in economic domain, technological domain, in every domain of whatever we need.
Thank you, General. And on that note, I am going to ask you to join me in thanking our panel. It's been a very informative discussion. And thank you to ORF and MEA for hosting us for this important panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panelists and the moderator. If I could invite you for a quick photograph.